The fourth Sunday in the Easter season is known as Good Shepherd Sunday, and obviously the 23rd Psalm is appropriate for this day. It's also Mother's Day. And these two things for me seem to come together. They come together for me because, you see, my mother introduced me to God. She was an interesting person. My mother was a country girl, grew up in a rural area of West Virginia, went to a little country Methodist church as a young person. Things were very simple in that congregation. And she was the one who saw to it that I would first of all learn to pray. I still have some recollection of that process of being made to kneel beside the bed, hold my hands properly, and learn that prayer, "Now I lay me down to sleep. I pray the Lord my soul to keep." I wanted to omit the rest of it. If I die before I wake. That scared the hell out of me. But I learned it. Mother's Day and Good Shepherd Sunday somehow go together. At least they do for me. In the gospel lesson for this morning, Jesus is in the temple in Jerusalem. It's winter time. It's the Feast of Dedication. This looks back to a historical event. In the year 165, the Syrians were run out of Israel. They had desecrated the temple, so the temple was rededicated. It became a major feast day in Judaism. And so it is that Jesus is in Jerusalem, walking in the portico of the temple, and is confronted by the temple leadership. They're not happy with him at all, because Jesus seems to draw crowds. And the crowds are saying things like, "He's the Messiah. He's the Messiah." Now you have to understand that that word, that designation, Messiah, carries with it a whole lot of literature, a whole background of history in that land of Israel. It seems that at every appropriate time in Israel's history, some leader has come forth, some holy person, to lead Israel against its enemies, to restore justice. There had been other so-called messiahs. Sometimes they were called prophets. They even went through a period where they had kings. But these were the messiahs, the saviors, the one who would protect and make Israel great. The Messiah was a heavenly figure, obviously, human in one sense, empowered by God in another very real sense. And so it is that Jesus is in Jerusalem. The people are saying, "We want a new Messiah. He's the one. We want a new leader," because you see, again, they're oppressed. Oh, the Syrians have been gone for 100 and some years. Now it's the Romans. They want somebody desperately to lead them into independence. And they are beginning to talk of Jesus in the terms of being the Messiah. ones with the vested interest in the long-term life of Israel and its temple and its religious culture are the priests in the temple. They confront Jesus on this particular day and said, people are saying you are the new Messiah. Tell us clearly who you are. Are you the one? That kind of question put to Jesus is like that old saying, have you stopped beating your wife? He's damned if he does, and he's damned if he doesn't. If he says yes, then they will expect a revolution. If he says, no, I'm not the one, then who's going to pay any attention to him? What he says to those people is, you are not part of my flock. It's another way of saying, you don't get it. You don't get it. If you were part of the flock, then you would understand. Things would become clearer. All of this is still a term we use today. Yesterday at the women's breakfast at FAST, the manager and I know each other casually, and he asked me when he came by the table, are all these folks members of your flock? And I said, no. Some are just guests. But we still use the terminology. It's embedded in Hebrew thought and in that idea that the Jews belong to God. They are God's flock. So it is that the confrontation takes place. Jesus goes on to say to them, they not only are not members of his flock, but they do not know the shepherd. What's the shepherd like? That's what that psalm we just read is like. The shepherd is what all of us want. Fertile pastures. Fertile pastures are the places we live, the places we dream about living. Still waters. Isn't that what you and I want in our life? Not unruly waters, things running amok. Still waters. Straight paths. Straight paths. No side deviations. Get where we want to get. How many times have we voiced that? We want companionship for the journey we are on. We fear loneliness. We fear death. The shepherd feeds us. Love that imagery. Spreads the table of food and drink before us. Food for not only the body, but food for the soul. Isn't that why we come here? I recently read an article from the Pew Report, the Pew Research people. They're very prominent. They say that the reason church membership is dropping now to an all-time low is because people cannot reconcile their contemporary ideas with those expressed in traditional religion. Who believes in miracles anymore? Or we might say, oh, that was a miracle, but more like a lucky chance, is what we really think. and more people are leaving churches. The latest Pew report says we're now down to about 37% of the population identify with the church. And they go on to say that more and more people think that faith has to do with believing certain dogmas, certain creeds, certain teachings that are no longer applicable in a modern society. Many of us here have grandchildren. Are your grandchildren as involved in church life as you were? Or as your children were? Mine aren't. How often have you heard someone say, I'm really not religious, but I'm spiritual? I have a response to that, but I can't say it in church. Beloved, what Jesus said was that, first of all, you belong, and then you believe. You belong, and then you believe. If you belong to a caring, loving family, then you believe that families are supposed to be that way. If you belong to an organization that is dedicated to caring for the uncared for, then you believe that that's valuable. It's in the belonging that you learn to believe. That's why my mother saw to it that my father took me to church. She didn't like wearing hats, and that's when we wore hats. Jesus goes on to say, I know my sheep, and they follow me. I know my sheep. I know their warts, their beauty, their faults. Back when I was a university chaplain and running a program, at the end of the year, I would always take my students out to dinner at a nice restaurant. And I was amazed. I seldom recognized them when they first would appear in the lobby of the dorm. They were dressed in nice clothes. The girls' school, they all had on makeup. I almost wanted to give them name tags. Don't we do that? We make ourselves presentable for certain occasions. We put on the good face. What about the one who knows you when you're not like that? What matters is not how you look, it's how you belong. It's in the belonging that you learn to believe. God knows what you really look like. We begin every service by declaring that before God all hearts are open, all desires known, and from whom no secrets are hidden. The last thing that Jesus tells those esteemed Jewish leaders in the temple is, I can offer you something that you don't have. Eternal life. I don't think he was talking necessarily about life after death. That's probably part of it, but I think what he's saying, if you are part of the flock, if you are a member of the flock, your life will be so enriched, so rooted and grounded in love, that fear is diminished, and that you achieve courage. Paul Tillich, the great theologian, wrote in his book, The Courage to Be, if you raise any virtue to its highest degree, it's indistinguishable from courage. I no longer pray for faith or right belief. I pray for courage. Mother's Day and Good Shepherd. They're related. The shepherd, the mother as the shepherd. I knew absolutely nothing about sheep, or cattle for that matter, growing up. Lived on one of the busiest streets in Atlanta. We didn't even have dogs. Then I got to Ireland. That was a real education. Shepherds with flasks in their back pockets. Sheep all mixed together, so the way they separate them is they spray paint their butts. The one with red paint belongs to me, because they have common feeding grounds. That was my introduction and most of my education about sheep. But I do know one honest-to-God live shepherd. She is a very attractive 50-year-old redhead. She's one of the best dog trainers in the South. Has a farm in North Hall and has a flock of sheep, 25 or 30 of them. And she teaches me about sheep. I decided one day when I had my dog out there that I would go, while she was training the animal, I would go check out the sheep. When I was about 20 yards from the pasture, they got up and all moved to the far side of the pasture. What Vicki has taught me is you have to have a relationship with the sheep. She said, cattle you push. You get behind cattle and beat their butts and they move. You drive them from horses. If you get behind sheep, what they will do is they will begin moving and then they will fork off and circle around and come up behind you. Sheep learn voices. Alex Taylor, who did our Linton program, went to work with Vicki for a while. And her training consisted of going into the pasture with Vicki and just talking, so that the sheep got used to her voice. And then there's Pearl. Pearl's a 125-pound sheepdog. She runs a tight ship. If she wants to move the sheep, she knows how to do it. It doesn't have to be a human being. It has to be one who's, first of all, a friend, and secondly, a protector. Pearl will take on a coyote, and has. Seems to me on this Mother's Day and Good Shepherd Sunday, the two images somehow come together. My mother was my first shepherd. And I've had other shepherds who have known me as I am. But interestingly enough, almost all of them have been within the context of the community. So we come together to be a part of the flock. And in the flock, you learn. In the flock, you get loved. In the flock, you get fed. It's not a bad place to be. Take it to the bank. Amen.